The morning air hung thick with humidity as storm clouds gathered over Millbrook County, Wisconsin. It was 9:47 a.m. on what should have been a perfect Sunday for a picnic. The temperature had already climbed to 78 degrees, unusual for mid-June, and the barometric pressure was dropping fast. Weather reports warned of severe thunderstorms by evening, but for now the sun fought through the gathering darkness, casting an ominous yellow glow across the countryside. At the Riverside Foster Home, a weathered Victorian mansion that had housed troubled children for over 3 decades, 5 foster kids were about to embark on what would become one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries in Wisconsin's history. Delilah Chen, 16 years old, had been in the system since she was 9. Her parents died in a house fire that she somehow survived, though the physical scars on her arms told only part of her story. The emotional scars ran deep. Delilah was the unofficial leader of the group, protective, fierce, and carrying secrets that made her eyes look decades older than her teenage face. She had been at Riverside longer than any of the others, and the younger kids looked up to her like a big sister they'd never had. Marcus "Tank" Rodriguez, 15, got his nickname not from his size — he was actually the smallest of the group — but from his incredible resilience. Tank had been bounced between 17 different homes before landing at Riverside 8 months ago. Born to a drug-addicted mother who abandoned him at a gas station when he was 7, Tank learned early that survival meant staying invisible. But at Riverside, something changed. For the first time in his life, he felt like he belonged somewhere. Ophelia Blackwood, 14, was the dreamer of the group. With striking red hair and freckles that danced across her pale skin, she wrote poetry in a leather journal she carried everywhere. Ophelia had been placed in foster care after her grandmother, her only living relative, developed dementia and could no longer care for her. She'd been at Riverside for 2 years, and her journal contained not just poems, but detailed observations about everyone around her, observations that would later prove crucial to understanding what really happened. That Sunday, Zephaniah, Zeph Morrison, 13, was the tech genius before anyone knew what that meant. In 1981, while other kids played with toys, Zeph was taking apart radios and building primitive computers from scraps. His parents were killed in a car accident when he was 10, and he'd been living at Riverside for 3 years. Zeph had an almost photographic memory and noticed details others missed, a trait that made him invaluable to his foster siblings and ultimately may have sealed his fate. Cleo Washington, the youngest at 12, had a smile that could light up the darkest room. She'd been born to a teenage mother who tried her best but couldn't escape the cycle of poverty and addiction. Cleo had been in foster care since she was 8, bouncing between homes until she found stability at Riverside. Despite everything she'd been through, she maintained an infectious optimism that kept the group's spirits up during their darkest moments. Riverside Foster Home sat on 47 acres of rolling hills and dense woodland, 15 miles outside the town of Millbrook. The house itself was a sprawling 3-story Victorian built in 1923 by railroad magnate Edmund Thornfield. After Thornfield's mysterious death in 1951, he was found at the bottom of the main staircase with no explanation for how he fell. The house was sold to the county and converted into a foster home. The home was run by Margaret Holloway, a stern woman in her mid-50s who had been caring for foster children for over 20 years. Margaret had never married, never had children of her own, and seemed to view her role as more of a duty than a calling. She maintained strict rules: lights out by 9 p.m., no talking after bedtime, chores completed before any recreational activities, and absolutely no venturing into the basement or the 3rd floor, which she kept locked. Her assistant, Bernard Krensky, was a quiet man in his 40s, who handled maintenance and transportation for the home. Bernard had worked at Riverside for 7 years, arriving shortly after being released from a 2-year stint in county jail for assault, though the records of his conviction had mysteriously disappeared from the courthouse files. The children found him unsettling. He had a habit of watching them from dark corners, and his rare smiles never reached his eyes. The only bright spot in the children's lives was Miss Elena Vasquez, a part-time counselor who visited twice a week. Elena was in her 30s, warm and caring, and genuinely seemed to connect with the children. She'd been advocating for better conditions at the home, and had recently started asking questions about the locked areas of the house and why the children seemed so fearful around Bernard. Sunday morning began like any other at Riverside. The children woke at 6 a.m. sharp, completed their morning chores, and sat down for breakfast at the long wooden table in the dining room. Margaret announced that, weather permitting, they would be allowed their monthly picnic at Devil's Lake, a popular swimming spot about 12 miles from the home. "The storm's not supposed to hit until tonight," Margaret said, ladling out portions of watery oatmeal. "Bernard will drive you in the van. Be ready by 10 o'clock sharp." The children exchanged excited glances. These monthly outings were the highlight of their existence at Riverside. A few precious hours away from the oppressive atmosphere of the house. A chance to act like normal kids. As they prepared for the picnic, Delilah pulled Ophelia aside in the bathroom they shared. "Did you finish what I asked you to do?" Delilah whispered, checking to make sure they were alone. Ophelia nodded, her face serious despite her young age. "I wrote down everything. Every time, every place, everything I could remember. It's all in my journal." "Good. Keep it with you today." "And Ophelia," Delilah gripped her friend's shoulders, "if something happens to me, you make sure that journal gets to Miss Vasquez. Promise me." "Nothing's gonna happen, Delilah. We are just going on a picnic." But Delilah's eyes were dark with worry. "Promise me." "I promise." At 10:15 a.m., the 5 children piled into the faded blue Riverside foster home van. Bernard sat behind the wheel, his thick fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel. Margaret stood on the front porch, watching them leave with an expression that seemed more anxious than usual. "Remember," she called out, "be back by 5 o'clock. The storm will be here by 6. Tank pressed his face against the window as they drove away, watching the Victorian mansion shrink in the distance. Something felt different about today, though he couldn't put his finger on what it was. Maybe it was the oppressive weather, or maybe it was the way Bernard kept glancing at them in the rearview mirror. But Tank felt a knot of unease growing in his stomach. Zeph noticed it too. His analytical mind was cataloging inconsistencies. Bernard was taking a different route than usual, one that wound through more isolated back roads. The van's radio, which Bernard always kept tuned to the local news station, was switched off. And most strange of all, Bernard had packed significantly more supplies than necessary for a simple afternoon picnic. "Mr. Krensky," Cleo piped up from the back seat. "Are we going a different way today?" "Road construction," Bernard replied curtly, his eyes never leaving the rearview mirror. "This way's faster." But Zeph had been studying maps of the county for years. It was one of his hobbies, and he knew this route would add at least 20 minutes to their journey. He caught Delilah's eye and saw that she was thinking the same thing. As they drove deeper into the countryside, the landscape became increasingly isolated. Dense forests pressed in on both sides of the narrow road, and they hadn't seen another car for over 10 minutes. The storm clouds overhead were building into towering thunderheads, and the air pressure was dropping so fast that Ophelia's ears were popping. "Storm's coming in faster than they predicted," Bernard muttered, more to himself than to the children. It was the last thing any of them would remember him saying. They arrived at Devil's Lake at 11:30 a.m. The lake was a pristine body of water nestled in a valley between 2 forested hills, popular with locals for swimming and fishing. On a normal Sunday, the area would be crowded with families, but today the approaching storm had kept most people away. Only 2 other vehicles were visible in the parking area, a red pickup truck and a dark sedan with tinted windows. Bernard parked the van near the water's edge and began unloading their picnic supplies. The children spread out, grateful to be free from the confines of the vehicle. Delilah and Ophelia walked along the shoreline, talking in hushed tones. Tank and Zeph started a game of catch with a baseball Tank had brought. Cleo found a sunny spot near a large oak tree and began picking wildflowers. For a brief moment, they were just normal kids enjoying a summer day. "I'm going to check on some things," Bernard announced. "You children stay close to the water. Don't wander off into the woods." He walked toward the dark sedan, and Zeph, ever observant, noticed him speaking with someone through the driver's side window. The conversation lasted several minutes, and when Bernard returned, his demeanor had changed. He seemed agitated, constantly checking his watch and scanning the tray line. At 12:45 p.m., Bernard gathered the children together. "Change of plans," he said. "We are going to have our picnic at a different spot, somewhere more private." "But we just got here," Cleo protested, "and I love this place." Now Bernard's voice carried a sharp edge that made all 5 children freeze. "Get in the van, now." The second location was deep in the woods, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that seemed barely wide enough for the van. Ancient oak and maple trees formed a canopy so thick that it blocked out most of the sky, creating an artificial twilight even in the middle of the day. The road ended at a small clearing beside a creek that was little more than a trickle. "This is perfect," Bernard said, but his forced enthusiasm fooled no one. Nice and quiet, no crowds. As they unloaded the van for the second time, Delilah noticed something that made her blood run cold. Through the trees, barely visible, was the dark sedan from Devil's Lake. It had followed them. She caught Tank's eye and nodded toward the car. His face went pale as he spotted it too. Without a word, he began moving closer to the younger children. "Bernard," Delilah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Who's in that car over there?" Bernard spun around, his eyes wild. "What car? I don't see any car." But it was too late. They all saw it now, and they all understood that something was terribly wrong. Zeph's mind was racing, calculating distances and escape routes. The dirt road was the only way out, and both the van and the sedan were blocking it. The creek was too shallow to provide any real concealment, and the forest was dense enough that they could easily get lost, trying to navigate it. Ophelia clutched her journal tighter, remembering Delilah's words from that morning. Whatever was about to happen, she had to make sure the journal survived. She slipped it under a log near the creek, marking the spot in her mind. "Bernard," Delilah said, stepping protectively in front of the younger children, "I think we should go back now. The storm's getting closer." As if summoned by her words, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. The first fat raindrops began to fall, patting against the leaves above them. "No," Bernard said, and now all pretense was gone from his voice. "No, I don't think we will be going back." The passenger door of the dark sedan opened, and a figure stepped out. Even in the dim light filtering through the trees, the children could see it was a man in his 50s, well-dressed, with gray hair and cold eyes that seemed to catalog each of them like inventory. "These are them?" the man asked Bernard. "These are them." The man smiled, but it was the kind of smile that belonged in nightmares. "Perfect. The buyers will be very pleased." In that moment, everything crystallized for Delilah. All the locked doors at Riverside, all the mysterious visitors who came late at night, all the previous foster children who had simply been transferred to other homes with no forwarding information. It all made horrible sense. "Run," she whispered to the others. "Run now." But there was nowhere to go. As if reading her thoughts, 2 more men emerged from the forest behind them. They had been waiting, watching, ensuring that escape was impossible. Tank grabbed Cleo's hand and started toward the creek, but one of the men from the forest intercepted them. Zeph dove for the van, hoping to find something they could use as a weapon, but Bernard caught him by the collar and yanked him back. "Please," Ophelia said, tears streaming down her face. "We won't tell anyone. We promise. Just let us go." The well-dressed man laughed. "Oh, my dear child, you won't be telling anyone anything." Thunder crashed overhead, and the rain began falling harder. In the chaos that followed, several things happened almost simultaneously. Delilah broke free from Bernard's grasp and made a desperate run for the forest. She made it perhaps 50 yards before disappearing into the thick undergrowth. Tank, still holding Cleo's hand, managed to slip past one of the men and splashed across the shallow creek. They vanished into the trees on the opposite side. Zeph, using his small size to his advantage, rolled under the van and crawled out the other side. He ran toward the dirt road, hoping to flag down help, but there was no one coming. Ophelia, the dreamer who had documented everything, found herself face to face with the well-dressed man. She looked into his cold eyes and realized she was seeing the face of evil itself. "The journal," she whispered, thinking of all the secrets she had written down, all the evidence that could bring justice. "Find the journal," but her words were lost in another crash of thunder. At 6:30 p.m., as the storm reached its full fury, Margaret Holloway called the Millbrook County Sheriff's Department to report that 5 foster children and their supervisor had not returned from their scheduled picnic. Sheriff Dennis Crawford, a 20-year veteran of law enforcement, initially treated it as a routine matter. Weather delays were common, and he assumed they had simply taken shelter somewhere until the worst of the storm passed. By 9 p.m., with no word from Bernard or the children, Sheriff Crawford organized a search party. They found the van at 10:45 p.m., abandoned at Devil's Lake with the keys still in the ignition. The picnic supplies were still in the back, untouched. There was no sign of the 5 children or Bernard Krensky. The official investigation began the next morning. Search teams combed Devil's Lake and the surrounding forest for 3 days, finding nothing. Bloodhounds lost the scent at the lake's edge. Divers searched the deepest parts of the lake and found no bodies. It was as if 5 children and 1 adult had simply vanished into thin air. Sheriff Crawford interviewed Margaret Holloway extensively. She claimed to know nothing about Bernard's background beyond his employment at the home. When pressed about his criminal record, she maintained that she had been told it was minor and long ago. The investigation revealed disturbing inconsistencies in the foster home's records. Several children who had supposedly been transferred to other facilities could not be located. Background checks on previous staff members turned up multiple individuals with criminal histories that should have disqualified them from working with children. But without bodies, without witnesses, and without evidence of a crime scene, the case quickly grew cold. 3 weeks after the disappearance, a hiker found Bernard Krensky's body floating in a lake 30 miles away. He had been shot once in the back of the head, execution style. His wallet was missing, and his body showed signs of having been in the water for at least 2 weeks. The discovery shifted the investigation's focus. Now law enforcement was looking at the possibility that Bernard and the children had been victims of a random crime, perhaps a robbery gone wrong, or an encounter with drug dealers using the remote area for their operations. This theory gained credibility when detectives discovered that Bernard had accumulated significant gambling debts in the months before his death. Perhaps he had gotten involved with dangerous people, and the children had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The case was reclassified as a multiple homicide, though the children's bodies were never found. The official theory was that they had witnessed Bernard's murder and been killed to eliminate them as witnesses. Their bodies, investigators reasoned, had been disposed of in a way that ensured they would never be discovered. As the months turned to years, the disappearance of the Riverside 5 became local legend. The foster home was shut down after investigators uncovered evidence of widespread abuse and neglect, though Margaret Holloway was never charged with any crime related to the children's disappearance. In 1983, Margaret died of a heart attack, taking whatever secrets she possessed to her grave. The case file grew thick with tips, theories, and false leads. Psychics claimed to know where the bodies were buried. Conspiracy theorists suggested everything from satanic cults to government experiments. Amateur investigators combed through every piece of evidence, looking for the clue that would crack the case wide open. But as the years passed, public interest waned. The original investigators retired or moved on to other cases. The evidence boxes were moved to a storage facility and largely forgotten. By 1990, the Riverside Five were nothing more than names on a cold case list and faded photographs on a bulletin board in the sheriff's department. The Riverside foster home stood empty for years after the children's disappearance. Local kids dared each other to spend nights in the abandoned house, telling ghost stories about the missing five. Most of the stories were harmless teenage fiction, but some visitors reported strange phenomena: voices calling from locked rooms, the sound of children playing in empty hallways, and an overwhelming sense of sadness that seemed to permeate the building. In 1995, the property was sold to a developer who planned to tear down the old Victorian and build luxury condominiums, but 3 separate construction crews refused to work on the site after workers reported tools going missing, equipment malfunctioning, and a persistent feeling that they were being watched. The developer eventually gave up and sold the property at a significant loss to a local historian named Dr. Patricia Newcomb, who wanted to preserve the house as part of the county's historical legacy. Dr. Newcomb spent years researching the property's history, uncovering layers of secrets that stretched back decades. She discovered that Edmund Thornfield, the original owner, had been involved in a network of wealthy men who collected children from orphanages and foster homes for purposes that were never clearly documented in the historical record. She also found evidence that the house had been designed with hidden passages and concealed rooms, features that would have been unusual for a private residence, but made perfect sense if the house had been designed for activities that required secrecy. But Dr. Newcomb's most disturbing discovery came in 2001, when she was renovating the basement. Dr. Newcomb had always known that the basement of the Riverside house was larger than it appeared. The blueprints from 1923 showed a significant discrepancy between the house's footprint and the accessible basement space. She assumed the missing area was simply structural foundation supports, utility spaces or storage areas that weren't meant to be accessed. But when she began serious renovations in 2001, 20 years after the children's disappearance, she discovered something that would forever change the understanding of what happened that Sunday night. Hidden behind what appeared to be a solid stone wall, Dr. Newcomb found a concealed room. The entrance was so cleverly disguised that it had been invisible for decades, activated only by pressing a specific sequence of stones in the basement wall. What she found in that hidden room defied explanation and would ultimately solve the mystery of the Riverside Five, though the truth would prove to be more horrible than anyone had ever imagined. The room contained evidence of a trafficking operation that had been running for decades. Financial records, photographs, and correspondence revealed a network of buyers and sellers that extended far beyond Millbrook County. Children had been bought and sold like commodities, their fates determined by the highest bidder. But most shocking of all were 5 sleeping bags arranged in a corner of the room, each containing personal belongings that belonged to Delilah, Tank, Ophelia, Zeph, and Cleo. And underneath one of the sleeping bags, Dr. Newcomb found a leather journal filled with the careful handwriting of a 14-year-old girl who had documented everything she had witnessed in the months before her disappearance. Ophelia's journal would finally reveal the truth about what happened at Riverside Foster Home and why 5 innocent children had to die to protect a secret that reached into the highest levels of county government and beyond. But that truth would also reveal that the story of the Riverside Five was far from over, because hidden in the basement of that old Victorian house, Dr. Newcomb found evidence that suggested not all of the children had died that Sunday, and at least one of them had survived. And after 20 years of hiding in plain sight, they were finally ready to tell their story. Dr. Patricia Newcomb's hands trembled as she opened Ophelia Blackwood's leather journal for the first time. 20 years had passed since 5 children vanished without a trace, and now she held in her hands what might be the key to solving one of Wisconsin's most haunting cold cases. The journal's pages were yellowed with age but remarkably well preserved, protected by the cool, dry conditions of the hidden basement room. Ophelia's careful handwriting filled every page, documenting months of observations that painted a picture of systematic horror at Riverside Foster Home. Dr. Newcomb's archaeological training had prepared her for many discoveries, but nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to read. Today, I saw Margaret talking to a man in an expensive car. She handed him photographs, and he gave her money. When she came back inside, she was smiling. Margaret never smiles. I think something bad is happening here, but I don't know what yet. Delilah says I should write everything down because grown-ups don't believe kids unless we have proof. So this is my proof book. Dr. Newcomb felt a chill run down her spine. Even as a 14-year-old, Ophelia had understood that she was witnessing something criminal. But the entries that followed revealed a conspiracy far more extensive than anyone had imagined. As Dr. Newcomb read deeper into the journal, a pattern emerged. Ophelia had documented a steady stream of visitors to Riverside Foster Home, always late at night, always well-dressed men in expensive cars, always meeting privately with Margaret Holloway. January 18, 1981. Another man came last night. He looked at the photos Margaret showed him and pointed at one. Margaret nodded and wrote something down. The next day, Jennifer was gone. Margaret said she was transferred to a home in Minnesota, but Jennifer never got to say goodbye. She left all her things behind, even her stuffed rabbit. Jennifer would never leave Mr. Hoppy. February 2, 1981. The man with the gray beard came back. This time he brought someone else, a woman with cold eyes who looked at us like we were animals in a zoo. They talked to Margaret for a long time. Marcus heard them mention overseas clients and special orders. I don't understand what that means, but it scares me. February 28, 1981. 3 more kids gone this month. Timothy, Sarah, and little Ben. Margaret says they all found permanent homes, but permanent homes don't usually take kids in the middle of the night without any paperwork. I counted the cars, 17 different ones since I started writing. That's 17 kids who disappeared. Dr. Newcomb realized she was reading evidence of a human trafficking operation that had been operating for years, possibly decades. But Ophelia's observations went deeper than just documenting the visitors. March 15, 1981. Found out why we are not allowed in the basement. Tank picked the lock when Margaret was in town. There's a whole room down there that's not on any of the house maps. It has sleeping bags and chains attached to the wall. There are pictures on a table. Pictures of kids who used to live here. Some of the pictures are wrong. Tank started crying when he saw them. We left quickly and haven't told anyone else yet. April 3, 1981. Bernard caught us near the basement door today. He didn't say anything, just smiled in that horrible way of his. But later, Margaret called us all into her office and said that any child caught in unauthorized areas would be located immediately. She was looking right at me when she said it. I think Bernard told her what he saw. April 20th, 1981. The locked room on the 3rd floor. I finally know what's up there. Zeph figured out how to get into the dumbwaiter shaft. There are filing cabinets full of records, photographs, and money. Lots of money. But worst of all, there are medical files. Someone has been giving us drugs without our knowledge. The vitamins Margaret makes us take aren't vitamins at all. No wonder some of the younger kids seem so sleepy and confused all the time. Dr. Newcomb had to stop reading. The implications were staggering. Not only had children been trafficked from Riverside, but that had been systematically drugged to make them compliant. She reached for her phone to call the police, then hesitated. After 20 years, what evidence would still exist? And more importantly, who could she trust with this information? Ophelia's next entries answered that question in the most chilling way possible. May 8, 1981. Sheriff Crawford came to visit today, but he wasn't here to check on us. He was here to meet with Margaret. I hid in the laundry room and listened. He was angry about something. Said the heat was getting too intense and they needed to clean house. Margaret gave him an envelope full of money and promised that things would quiet down soon. The sheriff is part of this. Who can we trust if the police are helping them? May 25th, 1981. Ms. Vasquez suspects something. She's been asking too many questions about the locked rooms and why some kids disappear without warning. Margaret and Bernard have been whispering about her. I heard Margaret on the phone saying the counselor is becoming a problem. I'm scared they are going to hurt Ms. Vasquez. She's the only adult who has ever been kind to us. June 1st, 1981. Ms. Vasquez didn't come for her regular visit today. Margaret said she was sick, but I saw her car in the parking lot behind the county building when we went to town. She looked fine. I think Margaret is lying. Maybe Ms. Vasquez is investigating from the outside now. Dr. Newcomb's blood ran cold. Elena Vasquez had disappeared shortly after the 5 children vanished. At the time, everyone assumed she had simply found another job. But what if something more sinister had happened to her? As Dr. Newcomb reached the journal's final entries, Ophelia's handwriting became increasingly urgent. The words cramped together as if she was running out of time. June 10th, 1981. Something big is happening. Margaret has been on the phone constantly, and Bernard loaded equipment into the van, things that looked like medical supplies. A new man came today, someone I have never seen before. He was different from the others, more dangerous. He looked at each of us like he was measuring us for something. Margaret called him the Collector. June 12th, 1981. Delilah thinks they are planning to take all of us soon. The usual pattern is 1 or 2 kids at a time, but this feels different. Bernard has been watching us constantly, and Margaret locked away all our personal belongings for safekeeping. I'm hiding this journal in different places each night. If something happens to us, I hope someone finds it and knows the truth. June 13th, 1981. Tomorrow is the picnic. Margaret announced it suddenly. We usually get more notice. Bernard seems nervous, checking his watch constantly and making phone calls. Delilah made me promise to keep this journal with me no matter what happens. She thinks the picnic is a trap. I think she's right. If you are reading this, please find the room in the basement. Look for the loose stone 3rd from the left, bottom row. Behind it is more evidence. Photographs, records, everything we found. Please don't let them get away with this. The final entry was written in a different hand, smaller, more desperate. June 14th, 1981. Morning. This is Zeph. Ophelia asked me to write this because her hands are shaking too much. The van is ready, and Bernard keeps looking at us in a way that makes my skin crawl. We all know we are not coming back from this picnic. Ophelia hid the journal. But if something happens, if we don't make it, please know that we tried to be brave. We tried to protect each other. Tell the world what happened here. Don't let them say we just ran away. We would never have left each other. We were family. Dr. Newcomb immediately contacted the FBI, knowing that local law enforcement might still be compromised. Special Agent Rebecca Martinez arrived from Milwaukee within hours, bringing with her a team of forensic specialists and cold case investigators. Agent Martinez had built her career on human trafficking cases, and she recognized immediately that the Riverside foster home case was far bigger than anyone had imagined. What we are looking at here, she told Dr. Newcomb, is potentially one of the largest child trafficking operations in the Midwest's history. These journal entries suggest a network that operated for decades, with corruption reaching into multiple levels of government. The basement room was processed as a crime scene. 20 years too late, forensic specialists found traces of DNA evidence that had somehow survived the decades. Hair fibers caught in the concrete walls, blood stains that had been painted over but were still detectable under ultraviolet light. But the most significant discovery came when they followed Ophelia's final instructions and found the loose stone she had mentioned. Behind the 3rd stone from the left, bottom row, investigators found a metal box that had been sealed to protect its contents from moisture. Inside were photographs, financial records, and a list of names that would shake the investigation to its core. The photographs were the most damning evidence. Images of children who had lived at Riverside, some in situations that clearly indicated abuse. But it was the accompanying documentation that revealed the true scope of the operation. Financial records showed payments ranging from $10,000 to $50,000 per child, with different prices based on age, appearance, and what the documents coldly referred to as compliance levels. The money had been flowing through a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts, making it nearly impossible to trace. But most shocking was the client list, a who's who of wealthy and powerful individuals from across the country. Politicians, business leaders, celebrities, and foreign nationals had all purchased children from the Riverside operation. At the top of the list was a name that made Agent Martinez's blood run cold: Judge Harrison Blackwood. Ophelia's own last name was Blackwood. The revelation that Judge Harrison Blackwood, a respected member of the county court system for over 30 years, might be connected to the trafficking ring sent shockwaves through the investigation. But when Agent Martinez dug deeper, she discovered a connection that was even more disturbing. Judge Blackwood was not just a client of the trafficking operation. He was Ophelia's grandfather. Court records revealed that Ophelia had been placed in foster care, not because her grandmother developed dementia, as the official story claimed, but because Judge Blackwood had personally signed the order removing her from her grandmother's custody. The grandmother, Rose Blackwood, had been trying to expose her son's involvement in the trafficking ring when she was suddenly declared mentally incompetent and institutionalized. "He sold his own granddaughter," Agent Martinez said, her voice filled with disgust. This wasn't just business for him, it was personal. But when agents went to arrest Judge Blackwood, they discovered he had died of a heart attack in 1995, 6 years before the journal was discovered. His death had been ruled natural causes, but now investigators wondered if someone had silenced him to protect the larger operation. While investigators worked to unravel the financial and political aspects of the trafficking ring, forensic specialists were analyzing the DNA evidence found in the basement room. The results would prove to be the most shocking development yet. DNA samples from the sleeping bags and personal belongings found in the hidden room confirmed that all 5 children had been held in that basement at some point. But additional testing revealed something extraordinary. Recent DNA evidence, less than 5 years old, suggesting that someone had been in that room long after. "Someone's been back," forensic specialist Dr. Amanda Chen told Agent Martinez. "Multiple times, actually. The DNA is degraded but recent enough to suggest regular visits over the past several years." But whose DNA was it? The samples didn't match any of the 5 missing children, at least not directly. However, advanced genetic testing revealed something that changed everything. The recent DNA shared genetic markers with DNA found on Delilah Chen's belongings. A family member had been visiting the basement room. Someone who knew about the hidden chamber. Someone who had been keeping vigil over the evidence left behind. The implication was staggering. Delilah Chen might still be alive. Agent Martinez assembled her team to discuss the possibilities. If Delilah had survived the events of June 14, 1981, where had she been for the past 20 years? And why hadn't she come forward sooner? "Think about it," Agent Martinez said to her team. She was 16 years old, the oldest of the group, and according to the journal entries, she was their leader. If anyone could have escaped, it would have been her. But Dr. Chen raised a troubling question. If she escaped, why didn't she report what happened? Why didn't she try to save the others? The answer came from an unexpected source. While reviewing old case files, investigators discovered a report from 1982 about a young woman found wandering Highway 41, approximately 60 miles from Riverside foster home. She had been severely traumatized, unable to speak, and had no identification. Hospital records listed her as a Jane Doe, approximately 17 years old, suffering from what doctors described as severe psychological trauma consistent with prolonged abuse. The woman had been transferred to a psychiatric facility in Madison, where she remained for 3 years before simply walking away one day in 1985. She was never found, and after a brief search, the case was closed. Agent Martinez obtained the medical records from the psychiatric facility. The physical description matched Delilah Chen perfectly, and more importantly, the patient had repeatedly drawn pictures of 4 other children, always the same 4 faces, always with tears in their eyes. She had been trying to tell people about Tank, Ophelia, Zeph, and Cleo, but no one had understood. With the possibility that Delilah Chen was alive, Agent Martinez launched a nationwide search. If the DNA evidence was correct, she was not only alive, but had been secretly returning to the basement room where she and her foster siblings had been held. The search led investigators through decades of false identities, psychiatric records, and transient communities. Delilah had clearly become skilled at staying invisible, moving frequently and using different names. But the DNA evidence suggested she had been in the basement room as recently as 2000, just a year before Dr. Newcomb's discovery. She had been close, watching, waiting for someone to finally uncover the truth. The breakthrough came when investigators discovered that someone had been making anonymous donations to child advocacy organizations across the Midwest, always in amounts of exactly $1,981, the year of the disappearance. The donations were traced back to a series of money orders purchased with cash, but security cameras at one of the post offices captured an image of the purchaser. The woman in the security footage was Asian, approximately 36 years old, with the distinctive burn scars on her arms that matched Delilah Chen's description from. On November 3, 2001, Agent Martinez received a phone call that would finally bring the case full circle. "My name is not important," the voice said. It was a woman, speaking carefully, as if each word had been rehearsed. "But I know you are looking for information about Riverside Foster Home." "Who is this?" Agent Martinez asked, but she already suspected she knew. "I was there when it happened. I saw what they did to my family, and I have been waiting 20 years for someone to finally listen." The caller provided details about the trafficking operation that had never been made public, information that only someone who had lived through the horror could know. She described the layout of the hidden basement room, the names of visitors to the foster home, and the systematic drugging of the children. But when Agent Martinez asked her to come in for an interview, the caller's voice became strained with fear. "You don't understand. They are still out there. The people who did this, they have power. They have money and they have connections everywhere. I have been hiding for 20 years because I knew that if they found me, I'd end up like the others." "What others?" Agent Martinez asked. "What happened to Tank, Ophelia, Zeph, and Cleo?" There was a long silence, and when the caller spoke again, her voice was broken with grief. "They killed them, all of them, right there in the forest while I hid in the trees like a coward. I watched my family die, and I couldn't save them." The caller, who Agent Martinez was now certain was Delilah Chen, provided a detailed account of what had really happened on June 14th. The picnic had indeed been a trap, orchestrated by Margaret Holloway, Bernard Krensky, and their associates to eliminate the 5 children who had discovered too much about the trafficking operation. But the plan had gone wrong. When the children realized they were in danger and attempted to escape, Tank and Cleo made it the farthest. Delilah's voice was barely a whisper. They almost reached the main road, but there were more men waiting there. I heard the gunshots from where I was hiding. Zeph tried to double back to help Ophelia, but Bernard caught him near the van. Ophelia tried to run toward me, but the man in the expensive suit, the one they called the Collector, he was faster. I stayed hidden for hours after the shooting stopped. I watched them load the bodies into the dark sedan and drive away. I waited until night, then I found Ophelia's journal where she had hidden it near the creek. That's when I knew I had to survive. Had to find a way to make sure the truth came out someday. Agent Martinez felt sick as she listened to the account. 4 children, murdered in cold blood to protect a trafficking ring, and one survivor, traumatized and alone, who had spent 20 years in hiding while their killers walked free. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Agent Martinez asked gently. "Because I tried," Delilah replied, her voice filled with bitter anger. "In 1982, I tried to tell the police what happened. Do you know who they sent to interview me? Sheriff Crawford. The same Sheriff Crawford who was taking money from Margaret Holloway. He told me I was delusional, that I was suffering from trauma-induced psychosis. Then he had me committed to a psychiatric hospital where they drugged me for 3 years. When I finally escaped from that place, I realized that the corruption went deeper than I had imagined. These people had money, power, connections. They could make me disappear just like they made my friends disappear. So I learned to become invisible instead." With Delilah's testimony, the picture of what happened at Riverside Foster Home finally became clear. The trafficking operation had been running since at least the 1960s, possibly earlier. Children were selected based on specific criteria: those without strong family connections, those unlikely to be missed, those who had already been traumatized and were therefore easier to control. The operation was sophisticated, with buyers from around the world and a network of facilitators that included law enforcement, judges, social workers, and politicians. Money flowed through shell companies and offshore accounts, making it nearly impossible to trace. But by 1981, the operation was facing increased scrutiny. Elena Vasquez's questions had raised red flags, and the 5 children at Riverside had discovered too much. The decision was made to eliminate the witnesses and shut down the Riverside location. Elena Vasquez had been murdered 3 days before the children's picnic, her body disposed of in a way that ensured it would never be found. Her car had been driven to another state and abandoned, creating the impression that she had simply left town. The children were supposed to disappear without a trace, but Delilah's escape had complicated the plan. The traffickers spent months hunting for her, but she had learned to survive on the streets, moving constantly, trusting no one. Armed with Delilah's testimony and the evidence found in the basement room, federal authorities began making arrests. The investigation quickly expanded beyond Wisconsin, as the scope of the trafficking network became clear. But many of the main conspirators were already dead. Margaret Holloway, Sheriff Crawford, Judge Blackwood, and Bernard Krensky had all died in the years since 1981, some from natural causes, others under circumstances that investigators now viewed with suspicion. The surviving members of the network had spent decades covering their tracks, destroying evidence, and eliminating potential witnesses. Building prosecutable cases would be challenging, but not impossible. The most significant breakthrough came when investigators discovered that the collector, the well-dressed man who had orchestrated the children's murders, was still alive and operating under a different identity. His real name was Dr. Marcus Thornfield, and he was the grandson of the original owner of the Riverside property. He had inherited not just the house, but the trafficking operation that his grandfather had started in the... Dr. Thornfield had been living in plain sight for decades, working as a respected pediatrician in Chicago, while secretly running one of the largest child trafficking networks in the country. Agent Martinez worked with Delilah to plan an elaborate sting operation. Using the evidence from the basement room, they would lure Dr. Thornfield back to Wisconsin under the pretense that someone was trying to blackmail him with information about the old Riverside operation. The plan was dangerous. Dr. Thornfield was sophisticated and paranoid, having evaded law enforcement for decades. But Delilah insisted on being part of the operation. "I have been running for 20 years, she told Agent Martinez. "It's time to stop running and start fighting back." On December 15, 2001, Dr. Thornfield received an anonymous message claiming that someone had found evidence in the basement of the old Riverside foster home and was demanding $500,000 for their silence. The message instructed him to come alone to Devil's Lake, the same location where the children's ordeal had begun 20 years earlier. Federal agents positioned themselves throughout the area, prepared for any contingency. Delilah, wearing a wire and under heavy surveillance, waited at the designated meeting spot. Dr. Thornfield arrived precisely on time, driving the same model of dark sedan he had used in 1981. Even after 20 years, Delilah recognized him immediately. The cold eyes, the predatory smile, the way he moved with the confidence of someone who had never been held accountable for his crimes. "Do I know you?" Dr. Thornfield asked as he approached Delilah, studying her face with the clinical detachment of a scientist examining a specimen. "You should," Delilah replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You killed my family 20 years ago." Dr. Thornfield's expression didn't change, but his hand moved slowly toward his jacket pocket. Federal agents, watching through high-powered scopes, tensed for action. "Ah," he said finally, a smile spreading across his face. "The one who got away. We looked for you for quite some time, you know. I'm impressed that you survived this long." Tank Morrison was 15 years old, Delilah said, ignoring his casual tone. Ophelia Blackwood was 14. Zephaniah Morrison was 13. Cleo Washington was 12. "You murdered children. I eliminated problems." Dr. Thornfield corrected her. Those children had discovered information that threatened a very lucrative operation. From a business perspective, it was simply risk management. His complete lack of remorse, his clinical description of child murder as risk management, was exactly what federal agents needed to hear. Every word was being recorded, building the case that would finally bring him to justice. "Where are their bodies?" Delilah asked, her voice breaking slightly. "They deserve to be buried properly." Dr. Thornfield laughed, a sound devoid of any human warmth. "My dear girl, there are no bodies to bury. We had to be quite thorough in our disposal methods. Let's just say that certain industrial processes leave no trace whatsoever." It was the confession Agent Martinez had been waiting for. The signal was given, and federal agents moved in from all directions. But Dr. Thornfield had one final surprise. As federal agents closed in, Dr. Thornfield pulled a small device from his pocket. Not a weapon as the agents had expected, but a satellite phone. "You think this is over?" he said calmly, even as agents drew their weapons. "You think arresting me will stop this? I'm just one node in a network that spans the globe. Even as we speak, there are children in facilities just like Riverside, waiting for buyers who will never be caught." He pressed a button on the satellite phone, and somewhere in the distance, an explosion echoed across the lake. Federal agents later discovered that Dr. Thornfield had rigged the old Riverside foster home with explosives, destroying whatever evidence might have remained in the building. "Insurance policy," he explained as agents handcuffed him. "Can't be too careful with evidence." But Dr. Thornfield had made one crucial mistake. In his arrogance, he had assumed that all the evidence was in the house. He didn't know about the backup cache that Ophelia and the other children had hidden in the forest near Devil's Lake, a second hiding place that contained photographs, financial records, and client lists that would prove even more damaging than what had been found in the basement. As Dr. Thornfield was led away in handcuffs, Delilah felt a mixture of triumph and hollow emptiness. Justice was finally being served. But it couldn't bring back Tank, Ophelia, Zeph, and Cleo. It couldn't give her back the 20 years she had spent in hiding, or erase the trauma that had shaped every day of her adult life. But it was a beginning. Dr. Thornfield's arrest sent shockwaves through the trafficking network. Within weeks, co-conspirators were destroying evidence, fleeing the country, or turning state's evidence in hopes of reducing their sentences. The investigation expanded internationally, as authorities discovered that the Riverside operation had been just one spoke in a wheel that reached into Europe, Asia, and South America. Children had been trafficked across borders, their identities erased, their futures stolen by wealthy predators who viewed them as disposable commodities. But the network's greatest weakness was also its greatest strength: the extensive record-keeping that had allowed it to operate efficiently across multiple jurisdictions. When federal agents finally cracked the encryption on Dr. Thornfield's financial records, they found detailed information about thousands of transactions spanning 4 decades. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Politicians, judges, law enforcement officials, social workers, doctors, and business leaders had all played roles in the operation. Some had been active participants, others had simply looked the other way in exchange for money or political favors. With Dr. Thornfield behind bars and the investigation expanding globally, Delilah faced a choice about her future. For 20 years she had lived in the shadows, defined by her role as a survivor and a witness. Now she had the opportunity to step into the light and help other victims find justice. She chose to become an advocate for trafficked children, using her experience and her knowledge of how these networks operate to help law enforcement identify and rescue victims. It was difficult work, requiring her to relive her trauma repeatedly, but it gave her a sense of purpose that she had never had before. "I couldn't save Tank, Ophelia, Zeph, and Cleo," she told Agent Martinez during one of their regular meetings, "but maybe I can save other children before they suffer the same fate." Her work led to the rescue of dozens of children and the arrest of hundreds of traffickers around the world. She testified before Congress about the need for better protection of foster children and more aggressive prosecution of trafficking cases. But despite all her successes, one question continued to haunt her. Were there other survivors out there, other children who had escaped from trafficking networks and were living in hiding, too afraid to come forward? In March 2002, while cleaning out a storage unit that had belonged to Elena Vasquez, investigators found something that changed everything: a second journal, this one written by the murdered counselor in the weeks before her death. Elena's journal revealed that she had discovered the trafficking operation months before the children's disappearance and had been secretly documenting everything she observed. But more importantly, her journal contained information that Ophelia's had not: details about other locations where trafficked children were being held. May 10, 1981. Confirmed my suspicions about the Pine Ridge facility. Spoke with a former employee who was fired for asking too many questions. Children are being moved between Riverside and Pine Ridge on a regular basis. Some are being prepared for adoption by wealthy clients, others for purposes I don't want to imagine. May 15, 1981. The network is bigger than I thought. Found evidence of similar operations in Minnesota, Iowa, and Illinois. All of them using the same model: isolated foster homes, corrupted officials, and children who won't be missed. How many kids are we talking about? Hundreds? Thousands? May 20th, 1981. Made contact with a social worker in Minneapolis who has been noticing similar patterns: children disappearing from the system, paperwork that doesn't add up, foster homes that seem to exist only on paper. We are planning to meet next week to compare notes. Elena's final entry was dated May 22nd, 1981, 3 weeks before the children's picnic. They know I'm investigating. Margaret Holloway has been asking questions about my background checks and why I have been requesting access to certain files. I think my phone is being monitored. If something happens to me, I have hidden copies of all my evidence in 3 separate locations. The children at Riverside are in immediate danger. If anyone reads this, please help them. These 5 children have discovered too much. Margaret is planning something for the next picnic. I have tried to warn them, but they are just kids. They don't understand how much danger they are in. If I can't stop what's going to happen, I pray that at least one of them survives to tell the truth. Elena Vasquez had known that the children were going to be murdered, and she had died trying to save them. Following the leads in Elena's journal, federal agents raided the Pine Ridge facility in northern Minnesota. What they found there would haunt investigators for years to come. The facility had been shut down in 1995, but not before hundreds of children had passed through its doors. Some had been adopted by wealthy clients. Others had simply vanished without a trace. But in the basement of the Pine Ridge facility, investigators found something that gave them hope. A series of carvings in the concrete walls, messages left by children who had been held there. One carving stood out from the rest. DC Prus TM, OBZM. Someone who knew about the 5 missing children had been held at Pine Ridge after their disappearance. But who, and were they still alive? The investigation into the trafficking network was far from over. With each arrest, with each facility raided, investigators uncovered evidence of new crimes, new victims, new horrors that had been hidden for decades. But they also found signs of hope, survivors who had escaped, children who had been rescued, and a growing network of advocates and law enforcement officials who were committed to shutting down these operations once and for all. Delilah continued her work as an advocate, but she also began searching for other survivors from the Riverside case. The carving found at Pine Ridge suggested that someone else knew about the 5 foster children, someone who might have crucial information about what really happened during those final days. As 2002 came to a close, Agent Martinez received another anonymous phone call, this one from a different voice, younger, more hesitant, but carrying the unmistakable weight of trauma. "I saw the news reports about Dr. Thornfield's arrest," the caller said. "I know you are looking for information about the Riverside case." "Who is this?" Agent Martinez asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. My name used to be different, but I was at Pine Ridge in 1982. They brought me there after I saw something I wasn't supposed to see." Agent Martinez's heart began to race. "What did you see?" "I saw what happened to the other children, the ones who didn't make it out of the forest that day, and I know where they took the bodies." The caller's next words would set in motion the final phase of the investigation, a phase that would finally bring closure to the Riverside 5 case and reveal secrets that had been buried for over 20 years. But more importantly, it would reveal that the story of the 5 foster children who vanished on a Sunday picnic in 1981 was not a story of 5 victims. It was a story of survivors, of courage in the face of unimaginable evil, and of a family bond that could not be broken even by death. The truth was about to come out, and it would change everything. Agent Rebecca Martinez sat in her office at 11:47 p.m., staring at the phone as it rang. After 18 months of investigating the Riverside foster home case, she had learned to expect calls at unusual hours. Survivors of trafficking networks rarely felt safe contacting authorities during normal business hours. "Agent Martinez," she answered, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "You are still looking for information about what happened in 1981, the voice said. It was young, male, and carried the distinct cadence of someone who had learned to speak carefully, weighing each word for potential danger. "I am," Martinez replied. "Can you tell me your name?" "My name now is David Carson. But in 1981 my name was Tommy Hendricks. I was 11 years old, and I lived at Riverside Foster Home until 3 weeks before the picnic." Martinez felt her pulse quicken. Tommy Hendricks, she remembered the name from the old case files. He had been listed as one of the children who had been transferred to another facility just before the 5 children disappeared. "Tommy, where are you now? Are you safe?" "I'm safe," he replied. "I have been safe for a long time. But I have been following the news about Dr. Thornfield's arrest, and I know things that might help you find them." "Find who?" "The others. Tank, Ophelia, Zeph, and Cleo. I know where they took the bodies." David Carson, formerly Tommy Hendricks, agreed to meet Agent Martinez at a secure location in Milwaukee. When she first saw him, Martinez was struck by how normal he appeared. At 32 years old, he was a software engineer, married with 2 young children, living what seemed to be a perfectly ordinary suburban life. But his eyes told a different story. They held the same haunted quality she had seen in Delilah Chen, the look of someone who had witnessed unspeakable horrors and spent decades learning to live with the memories. "I need you to understand something before I tell you what I saw," David said as they sat in the secure interview room. "I was supposed to be on that picnic. Margaret Holloway had put me on the list originally, but 3 weeks before, someone came to the house, a buyer. He took me and 2 other kids to a facility in Canada. Pine Ridge wasn't the only processing center. There was a whole network of them, stretching from Mexico to Canada. Children were moved between facilities like inventory, broken down psychologically until they were compliant enough to be sold." David paused, struggling with the memories. The Canadian facility was where they took the children who were destined for overseas buyers. "I was there for 8 months before I managed to escape during a transport to the airport. But before I was taken from Riverside, I knew something bad was being planned for the picnic. Margaret and Bernard had been acting strange, making phone calls late at night, meeting with people I'd never seen before, and I heard them talking about cleaning up loose ends." Agent Martinez leaned forward. "What exactly did you hear?" 3 days before I was taken to Canada, I hid in the dumbwaiter shaft that Zeph had shown us how to access. Margaret was in her office with 2 men I didn't recognize. One of them was Dr. Thornfield, though I didn't know his name then. They were discussing what they called the June solution. Dr. Thornfield was concerned that the 5 remaining children had discovered too much about the operation. He said that Delilah was a natural leader who could inspire others to resist, and that Ophelia was documenting everything with the attention to detail of a trained investigator. The plan was to eliminate all 5 children during the picnic, but they needed to make it look like an accident or a random crime. That's why they chose Devil's Lake. It was isolated enough for them to control the scene, but public enough that the disappearance would seem believable. David's most crucial information came from an unexpected source. After escaping from the Canadian facility in 1982, he had made his way back to Wisconsin, driven by a desperate need to know what had happened to his foster siblings. "I was 13 years old, living on the streets, but I couldn't let go of the need to know the truth," he explained. "I spent weeks hiding in the forests around Devil's Lake, watching the area, looking for any sign of what had happened. 2 months after the disappearance, I saw them. Dr. Thornfield and 2 other men came back to the forest near where the picnic was supposed to have taken place. They were in a different location, about 3 miles deeper into the woods, where there was an old mining operation from the..." David's voice became strained as he continued. "They had equipment with them, industrial equipment, and they spent 3 days at that site working around the clock. On the 3rd night, I managed to get close enough to see what they were doing. There was a mine shaft, probably 100 feet deep. They had brought portable generators, floodlights, and what looked like construction equipment. I realized they were sealing the shaft permanently." Agent Martinez felt a chill run down her spine. "You think the bodies were disposed of in the mine shaft?" "I know they were," David replied, "because I saw Dr. Thornfield throw something into the shaft before they sealed it. It was small, metallic, and it caught the light from their floodlights as it fell. I recognized it immediately. It was Tank's baseball, the one he carried everywhere, the one with his initials carved into the side. Tank would never have let go of that baseball willingly." Armed with David's testimony and detailed directions to the abandoned mine site, federal agents began the most complex excavation in the case's 22-year history. The mine shaft had been sealed with concrete and debris, requiring specialized equipment and weeks of careful work to access. The site was located in a remote section of Devil's Lake State Forest, so isolated that it had never been included in the original search efforts. The old mining operation had been abandoned in 1928, and over the decades, the forest had reclaimed most traces of the industrial activity. But when excavation teams finally broke through the concrete seal and began exploring the mine shaft, they found evidence that confirmed David's account. At a depth of approximately 90 feet, they discovered the remains of 4 individuals, along with personal belongings that definitively identified them as Tank Morrison, Ophelia Blackwood, Zephaniah Morrison, and Cleo, Washington. The discovery was both a breakthrough and a heartbreak. Finally, after more than 2 decades, the 4 missing children could be laid to rest with dignity. But the condition of the remains also provided forensic evidence of how they had died, confirming the worst fears about their final moments. Dr. Patricia Chen, the lead forensic anthropologist on the excavation team, delivered her findings with clinical precision that barely masked her emotional response to the case. The forensic evidence confirms that all 4 victims died from gunshot wounds, she reported to Agent Martinez. Based on the trajectory and wound patterns, they were executed at close range. The positioning of the remains suggests they were killed elsewhere and then transported to this location for disposal. But Dr. Chen's report contained one finding that stunned everyone involved in the investigation. Along with the 4 sets of remains, excavation teams had found something unexpected: a 5th sleeping bag. This one containing no remains but filled with personal belongings that belonged to Delilah Chen. The discovery of Delilah's belongings in the mine shaft raised disturbing questions. If she had survived the events in the forest, as everyone believed, why were her personal effects buried with the other children? Agent Martinez called Delilah immediately, asking her to come in for additional questioning. When Delilah arrived at the federal building, Martinez noticed something she had overlooked before. Despite 20 years of living in hiding, despite the trauma and hardship she had endured, Delilah looked remarkably well-nourished and healthy. "Delilah," Martinez said carefully, "we found your belongings in the mine shaft with the other children. Can you explain how they got there?" For the first time since coming forward, Delilah's composure cracked. Tears began streaming down her face, and her hands shook as she struggled to respond. "I never told you the whole truth," she whispered. "I couldn't. Even after all these years, I was still too afraid." What really happened in the forest that day? Delilah took a deep breath, steeling herself to reveal a secret she had carried for 22 years. "We didn't all try to escape at the same time," she began. "When we realized we were in danger, I made a decision. I told the others to run while I stayed behind to distract the men." "But that's not what happened, is it?" Martinez asked gently. "No," Delilah replied, her voice barely audible. "Tank refused to leave me. He said we were family, that families stick together no matter what. So we came up with a different plan." The truth about what happened in the forest was more complex and more heartbreaking than anyone had imagined. As Delilah finally revealed the complete story, a picture emerged of extraordinary courage and sacrifice by 5 children who refused to abandon each other, even in the face of death. "When Dr. Thornfield and his men cornered us, we were trapped near the creek," Delilah explained. "There was no way all 5 of us could escape. But Tank had an idea, a terrible, desperate idea that might save at least one of us. He proposed that we stage my death. I would hide my belongings with theirs, then slip away during the chaos while they made it look like I had been killed too. The plan was that I would survive to tell the world what had happened, to make sure they didn't die for nothing. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't let them sacrifice themselves for me. So at the last minute, I changed the plan." Martinez leaned forward, sensing they were approaching the heart of the mystery. "While the men were distracted, I slipped away and left my belongings behind as planned. But instead of running to safety, I hid in the forest and watched. I thought maybe I could help them somehow, maybe create a distraction that would allow them to escape. But there were too many men, and they were too well armed. I watched my family die, and I couldn't save them." The weight of survivor's guilt in Delilah's voice was overwhelming. For 22 years she had carried the belief that she had failed her foster siblings, that she should have done more to save them. But Agent Martinez realized there was still something missing from the story. "Delilah, if you watched them die, why did you tell me earlier that you hid in the trees like a coward? Why did you say you couldn't save them?" Delilah's response would reveal the final, most shocking truth about the Riverside 5 case. "Because I lied about being alone," Delilah said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Tank didn't just propose that I faked my death. He proposed that two of us fake our deaths. Martinez felt her world shift as the implications became clear. Who else escaped? Cleo, Delilah whispered. Little Cleo Washington. She was the smallest, the fastest, and the one Dr. Thornfield's men were least likely to search for thoroughly. While I created a distraction, she slipped away through the creek bed and hid in a drainage culvert about half a mile downstream. The plan was for both of us to survive, to find each other after the danger passed, and to tell the world what had happened. But when I reached the meeting point, she wasn't there. I searched for hours, calling her name as quietly as I could. But there was no trace of her. I thought maybe she had been captured after all, or maybe she had gotten lost in the forest and died of exposure. For 22 years I believed I had failed to save anyone. I thought I was the only survivor, carrying the burden of their memory alone. Martinez's mind was racing. If Cleo Washington had also survived, where had she been for the past 2 decades? The answer came in the form of a phone call that arrived at the federal building 30 minutes later. Agent Martinez, the receptionist said, "There's a woman on line 3 who says she needs to speak with you urgently about the Riverside case. She says her name is Cleo Washington." Martinez's hands trembled as she picked up the phone. Across from her, Delilah's eyes went wide with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "Agent Martinez," the voice on the phone said. It was warm, confident, and carried traces of a southern accent. "My name is Dr. Cleo Washington Williams. I'm calling from Atlanta, where I work as a pediatric trauma specialist. I believe you have been looking for me." "Cleo?" Delilah whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "Is that really you, Delilah?" Cleo's voice broke with emotion. "I have been following the news coverage of the case. When I saw that you had come forward, I knew it was finally time for me to stop hiding too." Within 24 hours, Dr. Cleo Washington Williams was on a plane to Milwaukee. The reunion between the two survivors took place in Agent Martinez's office, witnessed by a small group of investigators who understood they were watching something extraordinary. When Delilah and Cleo saw each other for the first time in 22 years, they embraced without a word, 2 women in their 30s holding each other with the desperate intensity of the children they had once been. "I looked for you," Delilah said through her tears. "I searched everywhere. I thought you were dead." "I looked for you too," Cleo replied. "But I was so scared, and I was just 12 years old. When I couldn't find you at the meeting point, I thought the men had captured you. I thought I was all alone." As their stories unfolded over the following hours, Agent Martinez pieced together what had happened to Cleo Washington in the years since her escape. After hiding in the drainage culvert for nearly 8 hours, 12-year-old Cleo had emerged to find herself completely alone in an unfamiliar forest. Terrified and traumatized, she had wandered for 2 days before being found by an elderly couple who lived on a farm about 15 miles from Devil's Lake. "They were good people," Cleo explained. "Jim and Martha Williams had lost their own daughter in a car accident years earlier, and when they found me dirty, scared, and refusing to tell them my real name, they didn't call the authorities. They just took me in. I was so traumatized that I couldn't speak for months. When I finally started talking again, I told them my name was Cleo Williams, that I had been living on the streets after my parents died. They believed me, or at least they pretended to believe me. The Williams family had provided Cleo with stability, love, and the opportunity to heal from her trauma. They homeschooled her, helped her work through her psychological wounds, and eventually legally adopted her when she was 16. "They never asked too many questions about my past," Cleo said. "I think they understood that I had been through something terrible, and they were more concerned with helping me build a future than forcing me to relive the past." Under their care, Cleo had thrived. She excelled academically, earned a full scholarship to Emory University, and went on to medical school with a specialization in pediatric trauma. Her work helping abused children was directly inspired by her own experiences, though she had never revealed the full truth about her background to anyone. I chose pediatric trauma as my specialty because I understood what those children were going through, she explained. I knew what it felt like to be hurt by adults who were supposed to protect you, and I knew how important it was to have someone who truly understood. Both Delilah and Cleo had carried crushing guilt about their survival. Delilah had spent 22 years believing she had failed to save anyone, while Cleo had spent the same period believing she had abandoned her foster family in their moment of greatest need. I dreamed about them every night for years, Cleo confessed. Tank, Ophelia, and Zeph, I would see their faces, hear their voices calling for help, and I would wake up feeling like I had failed them all over again. I knew that if I came forward, I could help bring their killers to justice, but I was also terrified that those same killers would find me and finish what they started. So I stayed hidden, building a new life while trying to honor their memory through my work. Every child I helped, every case I solved, every family I reunited. I did it all in memory of Tank, Ophelia, and Zeph, but it never felt like enough. Agent Martinez understood that both women had been carrying burdens that were far too heavy for any individual to bear. The guilt, the trauma, the decades of hiding, it had all been necessary for their survival, but it had also prevented them from fully healing. You both need to understand something, she told them. You were children. You were facing adult killers with resources, weapons, and a complete willingness to murder innocent people. The fact that you survived at all is nothing short of miraculous. More importantly, your survival has made it possible to finally bring justice to Tank, Ophelia, and Zeph. Without your testimony, without the evidence you preserved, Dr. Thornfield and his network might still be operating. With testimonies from both survivors, along with the evidence found in the mine shaft and the various caches hidden by the children, federal authorities were able to dismantle the trafficking network completely. Dr. Thornfield was convicted on multiple counts of first-degree murder, human trafficking, and racketeering. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, where he died of a heart attack in 2007. Some said it was natural causes. Others whispered that even in prison, there were people who remembered the children he had killed. The investigation expanded internationally, leading to arrests in 12 countries and the rescue of hundreds of children who were still trapped in the network. The Riverside case became a model for how to investigate and prosecute complex trafficking operations. But perhaps more importantly, the case led to significant reforms in how foster children are protected. New laws required more thorough background checks for foster home operators, mandatory reporting systems for children who are transferred between facilities, and independent oversight of residential care facilities. In 2004, 3 years after Dr. Newcomb's discovery in the basement, a memorial was erected at Devil's Lake State Park in honor of Tank Morrison, Ophelia Blackwood, Zephaniah Morrison, and Cleo Washington. The official records still listed her as deceased, and both survivors agreed that her privacy should be protected. The memorial took the form of a small garden with 4 benches arranged in a circle, each bearing a plaque with one of the children's names and a brief description of their personalities and dreams. In the center stood a statue of 5 children holding hands, with an inscription that read, "Family Forever, in memory of those lost, in honor of those who survived." Delilah and Cleo attended the dedication ceremony together, along with Elena Vasquez's sister and Dr. Newcomb, who had discovered the truth in her basement renovation. It was the first time either survivor had visited Devil's Lake since. They would have loved this place when it was peaceful, Delilah said, looking out over the lake that sparkled in the afternoon sun. Tank always said he wanted to live somewhere where he could go fishing every day. Ophelia would have written poems about the way the light reflects off the water. Zeph would have built a radio antenna to try to contact people on the other side of the lake, Cleo added, smiling through her tears. And little Cleo, she would have picked wildflowers to make crowns for all of us. In the years that followed, both survivors dedicated their lives to preventing other children from suffering the same fate. Delilah founded a non-profit organization that provided support services for trafficking survivors, while Dr. Washington Williams became one of the country's leading experts on trauma therapy for abused children. They worked together frequently, combining Delilah's first-hand knowledge of trafficking operations with Cleo's medical expertise to develop new treatment protocols for rescued children. "We couldn't save Tank, Ophelia, and Zeph," Delilah said during a joint interview in 2010. "But we can honor their memory by making sure their deaths led to something meaningful. Every child we help, every trafficker we put behind bars, every family we reunite, it's all part of their legacy." The Riverside case also inspired a new generation of investigators and advocates. Agent Martinez went on to head the FBI's Crimes Against Children unit, where she developed new techniques for investigating trafficking networks that are still used today. Dr. Newcomb converted the old Riverside foster home property into a training center for social workers and law enforcement officials, ensuring that the site where so much tragedy occurred would now serve to prevent future tragedies. As 2010 approached, nearly 30 years after the Riverside Five disappeared, Agent Martinez received one final piece of information that brought complete closure to the case. A construction crew, working on a highway expansion project near Devil's Lake, discovered a small cache buried beneath a fallen tree. The cache contained a metal box with a note written in a child's handwriting. "If anyone finds this, our names are Tank Morrison, Ophelia Blackwood, Zephaniah Morrison, Cleo Washington, and Delilah Chen. We lived at Riverside Foster Home, and we were a family. If something happens to us, please know that we weren't running away. We would never leave each other. We tried to be brave. We tried to protect each other. Please don't forget us. Please tell the world that we existed, that we mattered, that we loved each other more than anything." The note was dated June 13, 1981, the day before the picnic. When Agent Martinez showed the note to Delilah and Cleo, both women broke down completely. It was Tank's final gift to them, proof that even in their darkest moment, their foster brother had been thinking about preserving their memory and ensuring their story would be told. "He knew," Delilah whispered. "He knew we might not all make it, but he wanted to make sure the world would remember that we were family." On a warm Sunday in June 2006, exactly 25 years after 5 foster children disappeared during a picnic, 2 women stood together at the Memorial Garden at Devil's Lake State Park. They were joined by dozens of other survivors of trafficking operations, law enforcement officials, social workers, and family members of other victims. Delilah Chen, now 41 years old, had become one of the most respected anti-trafficking advocates in the country. Her work had led to the rescue of over 300 children and the arrest of dozens of traffickers. Dr. Cleo Washington Williams, now 37, was the Director of Pediatric Trauma Services at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta and had treated thousands of abused children, helping them heal from wounds both physical and psychological. Together they had turned their survival into a mission of protection for other children. "I used to think that surviving when they didn't made me selfish," Delilah said as she placed flowers on each of the 4 benches. "But I understand now that our survival was their gift to us. They made sure we lived so we could tell their story, so we could make sure other children don't suffer the same fate. They saved us by dying for us," Cleo added. "The least we can do is save others by living for them." As the sun set over Devil's Lake, casting long shadows across the Memorial Garden, both women felt something they had not experienced in 25 years: peace. Today, the Riverside case is studied in law enforcement academies around the world as an example of how trafficking networks operate and how they can be dismantled. The case files fill an entire room at FBI headquarters, documenting not just the crimes that were committed, but the investigation that brought justice and the reforms that followed. Dr. Thornfield's trafficking network, which operated for over 4 decades, was completely destroyed. The investigation led to the rescue of 84 children from various facilities around the world and resulted in 34 convictions across 12 countries. Delilah Chen and Dr. Cleo Washington Williams continue their work protecting children, though they now do so with a peace they never thought possible. They speak regularly at conferences, train law enforcement officials, and provide testimony that helps convict traffickers around the world. The Riverside property now houses the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's Midwest Regional Office, ensuring that the site where children once suffered now serves as a beacon of hope for finding and protecting other vulnerable children. And in the Memorial Garden at Devil's Lake, visitors still come to pay their respects to Tank Morrison, Ophelia Blackwood, Zephaniah Morrison, and the fourth child officially listed on the memorial, not knowing that she survived and went on to save hundreds of other children. The plaque in the center of the memorial bears a final inscription, added in, "They were children who became a family, victims who became heroes, and voices that refused to be silenced. Their courage changed the world." In the end, the story of the Riverside Five was not a story of 5 victims, but of 5 heroes who saved each other in the only ways they could. Tank, Ophelia, and Zeph saved Delilah and Cleo by ensuring their escape. Delilah and Cleo saved Tank, Ophelia, and Zeph by making sure their deaths led to justice. And together, all 5 saved hundreds of other children who would have suffered the same fate if their story had never been told. The trafficking network that destroyed so many young lives was built on a foundation of silence, secrecy, and the assumption that no one would care about missing foster children. But 5 children from Riverside Foster Home proved that assumption wrong. They proved that every child matters, that every life has value, and that love, even in the face of unimaginable evil, can ultimately triumph. Their voices, silenced for over 20 years, finally rang out with the force of absolute truth. And in the end, that truth set not only themselves free, but hundreds of other children who came after them. The Riverside Five had kept their promise to each other. They remained family forever, and they never let each other be forgotten. In memory of all the children who never made it home, and in honor of the survivors who made sure their stories were told,